Okay, when you think about how humans spread across the globe, it's just this monumental puzzle.
It really is.
And one of the biggest pieces, uh, linguistically anyway, is the Indo-European language family. Where did it all start?
Right. Languages like English, Hindi, Persian, they're all related.
And for decades, the standard answer, the map, basically pointed firmly towards the Pontic-Caspian steppe.
That's been the conventional theory, yes. It's held sway for a very long time in academic circles.
But what if that map's, well, maybe not wrong, but incomplete, or needs a serious update?
Well, that's often how science progresses, isn't it? New evidence comes to light, or we look at old evidence in a new way, and suddenly the picture shifts dramatically sometimes.
And that's exactly what we want to dig into today, because there's this alternative view, the out of India theory, or OIT, and it seems to be gaining, well, quite a bit of traction.
It is, and it's not just a minor tweak.
Yeah.
The OIT fundamentally reframes how we might think about ancient migrations and India's role in them.
It places India right at the center, doesn't it, as a source?
Exactly. And if you take India as a potential homeland for these languages, it logically suggests something quite powerful.
Which is?
Not just one single migration event, but potentially multiple waves of people moving out of the Indian subcontinent over a vast period of time, spreading across Eurasia.
Multiple waves. Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. We want to explore this multi-migration idea, working from the OIT framework, and really try to tease apart maybe two key periods, the time of the Rig Veda and the later era of the Mahabharata, see how they fit into this picture of India as this ancient engine of dispersal.
And it's crucial to remember when we say out of India theory, it's not some rigid monolithic thing. It inherently has to account for the dynamism, the back and forth of human movement over millennia.
Right, it's not like everyone just up and left on one Tuesday.
Not at all. It's a framework for understanding potentially continuous or at least repeated movements.
So what's the bedrock here? What kind of evidence actually supports the OIT? You mentioned it's multidisciplinary.
It really spans several fields. Genetically, for example, you find this high diversity and really ancient lineages of certain genetic markers, haplogroups.
Like genetic family trees.
Sort of, yeah, passed down the male or female line. And one in particular, R1A1, shows significant concentration and diversity within India.
And high diversity usually means?
High diversity and deep, old branches usually suggest an origin point. Think of it like a tree, the trunk and oldest branches are at the source. So for R1A1, the pattern suggests an ancient origin in India, followed by later movements radiating outwards.
Okay, that's a strong genetic hint. What about language? Does Sanskrit fit in?
It does, intriguingly. Sanskrit has this incredible complexity, its morphology, the word structures, and its phonology, the sound system. It's often seen as one of the most, if not the most, archaic or conservative of the Indo-European languages.
Meaning it's closer to the original root.
That's the implication. It points towards India being a potential linguistic epicenter, a place where the proto-language might have been spoken, and from which simpler derived forms spread out later, like the main trunk of the language tree.
And geographically, India itself.
India's geography is incredibly diverse. You have mountains, plains, coasts, different climate zones. It could sustain large, diverse populations for a very long time.
Making it a plausible candidate for a demographic source, a place where populations could grow and then naturally expand from.
Exactly. It ticks that box too.
Okay, so if we accept India as a plausible origin point, let's talk about that first proposed wave of migration. This takes us way back to the Rig Vedic era.
We're talking seriously ancient here. The Rig Veda is arguably humanity's oldest living sacred text.
And it contains clues itself, right? About its own age.
Absolutely. It offers invaluable internal evidence, things written within the text, that suggest an antiquity far beyond some conventional timelines. It's a real window into the deep past.
And the key clue often mentioned is the Saraswati River.
Yes. The Rig Veda describes the Saraswati vividly, not as some minor stream, but as a mighty flowing river flowing from mountain to sea.
Just poetic license, or?
Well, that's the fascinating part. Geological and climate studies, paleoclimatology, confirm that there was a massive river system there, but it underwent a major drying up event, desiccation, around 1900 BCE. It became essentially a seasonal stream after that.
So if the Rig Veda describes it as mighty and flowing,
its core composition must predate that drying up. It has to be older than 1900 BCE.
significantly older potentially. I've seen dates like 3000 BCE or even earlier mention based on astronomical references in the hymns too.
That's right. Some scholars push it back considerably based on those internal markers, placing it deep into the 3rd millennium BCE or even the 4th. This makes it incredibly ancient.
And this antiquity has implications for events mentioned within the Rig Veda, like the Battle of the Ten Kings.
Definitely. The Dashrajan Yuddha, mentioned quite a bit in Mandala 7, isn't just some later footnote in this view. It becomes a defining conflict of this very early Vedic period.
What was society like back then? We're not talking big empires yet, are we?
No, not at all. Think more along the lines of tribal confederacies, primarily pastoral economies, people moving with herds, and the beginnings of political structures. It's a very different feel from later Indian history.
So how does this early Vedic society connect to the idea of migrations? What would trigger people to leave?
Well, you have a few potential drivers. Environmental shifts, like maybe early stages of the Saraswati drying up, population pressures building up, or the fallout from major conflicts like that Battle of the Ten Kings.
Internal conflict, resources, climate. Classic migration triggers.
Exactly. Displaced groups, ambitious tribal leaders, people seeking new pastures. It would logically lead to outward movements, the first significant waves, perhaps.
And where did they likely go? Which direction?
The hypothesis suggests these early movements were primarily northwestward, out from the Punjab region, towards Central Asia, the Iranian plateau.
Carrying with them.
Carrying the early forms of Indo-European languages, foundational cultural ideas, maybe early religious concepts. These movements would account for those deep linguistic ties we see between the Indo-Aryan languages in India and the oldest branches elsewhere, like Iranian or even Proto-Greek or Proto-Slavic precursors.
So they're seeding the landscape, linguistically and genetically.
In a way, yes. The Rig Veda in this model becomes like this incredibly ancient snapshot of the Indian heartland from which these dispersals began.
Okay, so that's the early Rig Vedic wave. Deeply ancient. But you emphasize this wasn't a one-off event.
Correct. The OIT model implies multiple pulses, possibly over millennia.
Which brings us to the next major epoch, often discussed, the era associated with the Mahabharata epic.
A very different period, though still profoundly ancient by any measure.
How do we date the Mahabharata, roughly? And how does it differ from the Rig Vedic period?
Dating is complex. There's the traditional dating, often linked to the start of the Kali Yuga, around 3100 BCE. Then there are archaeological correlations, like with the painted gray ware culture, which is much later, maybe 1200 to 800 BCE.
So quite a range.
Huge range. But even the more conservative scholarly views place the historical core events and the final compilation of the epic significantly after the main Rig Vedic period we were just discussing.
They are distinct epochs, and that distinction matters for migration patterns.
Absolutely. The society depicted in the Mahabharata is vastly different from the Rig Vedas. You have large established kingdoms, Hastinapur, Indraprastha. You have complex statecraft, ethical dilemmas on a grand scale, sophisticated warfare described.
Chariots, complex battle formation.
Right, and a philosophical depth reflecting a much more developed stage of civilization compared to the earlier tribal confederacies. Conflating the Rig Vedic Battle of the Ten Kings with the Kurukshetra War, described in the Mahabharata, ignores these massive differences in time and societal structure.
And therefore ignores the potentially different reasons people might have migrated in each era.
Precisely. The triggers would likely be different.
So what might have triggered later migrations in the post-Mahabharata world, according to this model?
Well, the epic itself focuses on the Kurukshetra War. If we take that as reflecting, even distantly, a real devastating conflict, the consequences would be immense.
Massive loss of life, political vacuum, fractured kingdoms.
Exactly. Widespread devastation, societal upheaval, maybe even a kind of dark age following such a large-scale war. That kind of instability is a powerful catalyst for people to leave, to seek new opportunities, or simply escape the chaos.
So subsequent waves of emigration triggered by the fallout of these later epic-era conflicts.
That's a key part of the multi-migration hypothesis. These later waves would be distinct from the very early Rig Vedic ones.
And what would these later migrants carry with them? How would their impact differ?
They'd be carrying a more developed form of Vedic culture. Think established traditions, more complex rituals, sophisticated knowledge systems, astronomy, mathematics perhaps, maybe even specific clan identities, like displaced Kuru or Panchala groups mentioned in the epic.
So these later waves might be responsible for those Vedic cultural traces, sometimes noted in West Asia or even parts of Europe, specific parallels in mythology or ritual.
That's the idea. These later dispersals could explain some of those more specific cultural parallels that seem too developed to belong to the earliest phase.
And how did this spread happen? Still mass migrations or something else?
It was likely more varied. You might still have groups migrating, maybe smaller elite groups founding new settlements. But you also likely have increased trade networks carrying ideas, merchants setting up communities abroad, maybe religious teachers or philosophers traveling and sharing their doctrines.
So a more complex diffusion process, not just people moving en masse.
Probably a mix of mechanisms, yes. Less like a single flood, more like spreading networks and perhaps some targeted migrations.
We see evidence of this kind of cultural diffusion in other contexts too, don't we? Specific architectural styles, ways of organizing society.
Yes,
Right.
and certain philosophical concepts or specific ritual practices found across ancient West Asia could potentially be linked back to these later post-Mahabharata or later Vedic outward movements from India. It leaves a different kind of footprint than the earliest wave.
So let's try and tie these threads together. If we start with the out of India theory as a base.
It naturally unfolds into this dynamic picture of multiple distinct migration waves leaving the subcontinent over a very long period.
And this model seems to elegantly resolve a potential tension, doesn't it, between the extreme antiquity suggested by the Rig Veda and the Saraswati
A
evidence.
later, more complex but still ancient society we see depicted in the Mahabharata.
It allows both to be true within their own context. The Battle of the Ten Kings belongs to that early, pastoral, possibly climate-driven dispersal phase.
While the Kurukshetra War reflects conflicts within a more developed, kingdom-based society, potentially triggering its own later waves of movement due to internal strife and collapse.
So it wasn't just one outpouring, it was this continuous or at least recurring multifaceted process of people and ideas flowing out from ancient India,
A complex series of ripples, exactly, not a single splash.
leaving these lasting marks, genetic, linguistic, cultural, across huge areas of Eurasia.
It paints a picture of India not just as a recipient of culture, but as a profound, enduring wellspring, a cradle of civilization that actively contributed to the peopling and cultural landscape of the wider world.
So really what this deep dive suggests is that by adopting the OIT framework, we don't just get a different starting point on the map, we get a whole new way of understanding ancient India's role, dynamic, influential, and a source of dispersal over millennia.
It certainly offers a compelling narrative, and it leaves us, and you, the listener, with a rather provocative thought, doesn't it?
If looking closely at internal textual evidence like the Rig Veda's description of the Saraswati and connecting it with external data like geology can so drastically reshape our understanding of ancient migrations and timelines, well, what other long-held assumptions about our history might just be waiting for a similar deep dive? What happens when we start connecting more of those seemingly separate dots?